Hello everybody. Um, this video is going to kind of be a little bit of a continuation from my previous video. And this video is essentially motivated by what's just happened in the Houses of Parliament with regards to the amendment by, or the motion to try to bring forward a national inquiry by the Conservatives or the opposition. There's just something very, very rotten about British politics, and there has been for probably a good 40 years, if not longer. It just seems very, very, very vile, and I think when you've got people that are supposed to be representatives of constituents or people of a particular area of any given part of the UK, who are supposed to be represented by these MPs and councillors and so forth. And the fact that there seems to be very little in the way of accountability and any real responsibility for anything, and just the way that in which I think that UK politics works, and the sheer levels of bureaucracy and classism and unwillingness to really want to deal with anything that doesn't suit the the ideology and the agenda of, let's face it, the extreme left wing component within, well, pretty much every aspect of society in the UK, really, whether that's within the police force, within sections of the council, certainly within the judiciary system. I did pretty much just the education system, even in healthcare. It's pretty much across the board, really. I think when you've got people on making ridiculous amounts of money each year, essentially deliberately. Yeah, it's fun. Look, the way I see it is this, and I hate to be cynical and negative and pessimistic about the whole thing, but I think that the older I get, the more that I realise just how, just really how much of a cesspit the UK is and has been for many, probably since I was born, at least, and that's over 30 years ago. So, I really just don't think there's much hope for the UK at the moment. I really don't. I hate to be a kind of down in the dumps type person, and I'm not that kind of person all the time, but when you see things like what's going on at the moment, and you see the fact that over 300 MPs in the Houses of Parliament have voted to not allow a national inquiry to go ahead, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second, but to me, that tells me that's really a kick in the teeth to the victims of what I talked about in my last video, and I think as well, just this whole political correctness movement of how do I put it, sterilizing language, sterilizing issues, and well, let's talk about it, let's have a meeting about it, let's discuss it. It's like, well, you've had 30 odd years to discuss, you've had 50 years to discuss immigration, and you've had probably about 25, 30 years to discuss this particular issue, and yet here we are in 2025 with a lot of these people walking the streets, not, um, not completing the sentences essentially, and essentially getting away with all sorts of things. Because I guarantee these people aren't just involved in raping children. They'll be involved in all sorts of stuff. They'll be probably involved in drugs and God knows what, illegal businesses and so forth. And and coming back to the inquiry thing, it's like, I've been listening to some stuff this morning, on Talk TV and on GB News, and I get to some extent why people are critical and cynical of having a national inquiry, and maybe it probably would end up being a waste of time and probably a waste of money. And I think really we need an independent inquiry. Really, there shouldn't be any conflicts of interest. There shouldn't be any bribery going on or any levels of unnecessary bureaucracy and all that kind of stuff that could thwart it and because essentially a lot of the time with these inquiries, they take years. Very little is ever really known. All they do is come up with suggestions and highlight some things, but it never really gets to the root causes of what's really going on, why this has happened, and how we prevent it or how we completely stop it altogether. And I think like I said, I just think there's something very, very sour. Something, it makes you sick. It makes you physically sick. These poor girls that suffered for years, and not just the girls, their families as well, probably more in certain ways, because although a lot of these people that suffered the abuse, obviously a lot of them are adults now and are not going through that abuse anymore, but of course they're left with the scars, mental, emotional, sometimes physical scars, and the memories of that, and the trauma that all of that stuff causes, which it obviously will. And these people now have to try and have tried and are trying to rebuild their lives, and I feel sorry of course I feel sorry for them first and foremost, but I also feel sorry for the parents, because God knows what that's done to their parents. That they feel that they didn't do enough for their daughters, and that makes me really angry, actually. That because I think especially fathers, because they want to protect their daughters, just like anybody wants to protect their children, their sons or their daughters, but perhaps maybe in some ways a little bit more towards the daughters, because they're more, maybe in some ways more vulnerable when they're teenagers. And I think that so many fathers feel that they feel responsible almost for this in some way, because they couldn't get the authorities to act. They couldn't get the authorities to really listen to what they were saying, either because they just didn't believe them, or they didn't have enough evidence, or they just didn't want to, like I said in the last video, that they didn't want to. They didn't want to be responsible, essentially, for creating a shitstorm. That's what it is. That's what it boils down to. Like I said before, it's this didn't need to be. It's like, I get it. I get to some extent. No, when I say get, I don't mean. I get it. Why some people didn't say enough. I get why some people didn't do enough. I get it. But that was wrong. That was immoral. That was the wrong thing to do. If you're prioritising your salary, your job, over the safety of children, then in my opinion you shouldn't have any kind of position within the police, within the council, social services, in education, in healthcare, because obviously some of these people probably may have told nurses or doctors about what was going on. And a lot of people just kept hush about it. That's the truth, because they didn't want to. They didn't want to. They didn't want to. They didn't want. They didn't want to. They didn't want to have a scar on their reputation by saying things that would, by some, let's face it, a left wing predominantly more or less dominant status quo, let's say, in a lot of these, predominantly middle class, made up institutions, really, for the most part, anyway. Of course, you have working class people working in serious careers and professionals, but I think probably for the most part it tends to be, well-to-do working class types, or mostly middle class types. And those are the types of people that support this, that have supported this agenda of, multiculturalism at all costs, kind of thing, regardless of the outcomes that other people will have to suffer because of it, of which they probably won't have to suffer. They won't have to deal with themselves, because they won't live in the areas where the problems of multiculturalism, which there are, happen. So I just think I find it absolutely shocking, really. I think that I've always felt that about England. I've always felt that there's something deeply wrong about that country. Something deeply. There's just something that's too far ingrained, I think, in people. It's too. This level of, I've talked about many times, but this level of apathy, this level of this laziness, really, this lack of care, this lack of motivation to want to change it. Well, that's just the way things are. That's, we don't raise our head above the parapet, fam. We just keep sticking our heads in the sand, and that's a lot of that is honestly that is a lot of how a lot of British people live their lives and have for decades. They don't want to. They're too passive. They're too reserved. And probably, really, in many ways, they've just been too comfortable for too many years. And certainly when it comes to people in, genuinely potentially influential and in positions of authority, they just kept burying their heads in the sand. They hoped that this problem would just go away, that people would forget about it. That's what they wanted. That's why they kept bearing it away. It wasn't so much it was a cover-up, it was the fact that if we just don't talk about it, if we just don't discuss it, if we just don't put it out there, kind of thing, in the media, if it's a kind of away more or less from the majority of the public's eyes and ears, then eventually it'll just go away. And I think that's what Keir Starmer wanted. He wanted this issue to just go away. He didn't want to deal with it because he knows he's partly responsible for this. That's what it is. And I'm not saying that he's directly. I'm not saying him and only him is. Oh, it's entirely his fault that this thing's happening. I'm not saying that, but what I'm saying is that he probably knew about this a lot longer than most people, and didn't do enough. Whether that's, there might be a lot of reasons why that might have been the case, or it could very well be that he just and it's probably this is what I think probably is probably more the reality, that he just didn't want to deal with it. He didn't want to touch this. He didn't want to touch this poisonous chalice, kind of thing. He didn't want to go anywhere near it. He didn't want to be associated with it. And And I think ultimately it's because of his politics, because of the things that he genuinely believes in. And he believes in globalism. He believes in open borders. He believes in this whole cultural ideology of, we owe the world everything, so that we should be open to the world, kind of thing. And the immigrants have somehow got an absolute right to be here, regardless of where they come from and regardless of any potential consequences of allowing these people in. And I think that people like Starmer, unfortunately, have dominated pretty much all sectors, more or less, for the last, 25, 30 years. And since Blair was head of the Labour Party, I think before that there may have been more of a chance to have prevented this stuff from happening, really. But this ultra left wing just this sense that we know what's best for everybody kind of attitude. So you should all shut your mouths, pay your taxes, don't say anything uncomfortable because you don't know what you're talking about. You've got the wrong politics kind of attitude especially towards the working class, let's face it. And that's what I mean by classism. That's the thing that I noticed early on when I was a kid in England. There was always that sense of classism. It was there between teachers and students. It was there, when you used to see people come in and evaluate the school and things like that, and the police. It was predominantly middle class types. It was always this thing of how dare you question our authority kind of attitude. How dare you say anything that only middle class people can talk about, only middle class people can say. How dare you? You're nothing. You're the underclass. You're nobody. You're working class. You don't have a voice anymore. You're not allowed to have a voice because you're bigots. You're far right. You're bordering on pro-Nazi type ideology kind of thinking. That's genuinely what I believe. I think I'm right. And that's partly what allowed this thing to not to happen, but it allowed it to continue on for so long, because nobody wanted their names associated with this whole thing. That's what it is. It's like, shh, no, we don't talk about that. That's not happening really, as far as we're concerned. This has got nothing to do with us kind of attitude. So it's a complete lack of accountability. Nobody wanted to be the ones to have the guts to come forward and confront this issue head on, because they were scared, especially maybe in the early to mid 2000s, after 9/11 and all that, and this whole fear of racial profiling bullshit that had gone on and had been happening since Blair got into power, essentially. In fact, it had been happening long before that. It was just it just moved up a few notches, I think, once Blair got into power, certainly after a few years anyway. So it's this whole so-called progressivism is really, I think, in my opinion, is probably one of the root causes of why this had the potential to occur and why it actually has occurred. Because we just, but I also think it's part of the public's fault as well to some extent, because I think a lot of British people, they don't want to draw attention to themselves. It's a bit like here in Thailand in a way. It's I think England is a very, there is this sense that I get like Thailand, like Thai culture a little bit. There is this thing of overriding thing of, don't say that, don't do that, don't rock the boat kind of thing. You know, just keep hush about things. You know, don't say anything too provocative or you know, offensive or sensitive or anything like that. And this whole thing of this, what used to be a good, I think in many ways a good part of the UK in terms of our sort of social etiquette and sort of social norms and things like that, in terms of our manners and politeness and conversation and the way we try to be respectful and tolerant and all this. I think that they are the very things that have essentially brought us down as a country, and they are in many ways, but perhaps given what's happening at the moment, maybe in some ways possibly part of the reasons why this happened. Nobody wanted to raise alarm bells. Nobody wanted to talk about the red flags. So I think from now on, we really need to have, I personally think we need to have a reset in the UK. I don't think it's enough just to, slightly shift away from the left wing, this normalized progressive, or rather regressive, mold that we've got used to. We need a reset. I think it's not enough to reform things. We need to have a complete reset in the UK. And I think that will come with some very drastic policies. I think that will come with some very controversial decisions and actions that need to be taken. I think, and I just think the days of this should surely now be a point where a lot of people wake up and smell the coffee and realise that the UK, at least the government and the major authorities, councils, lawyers, that they're essentially infested with such depths of corruption that I don't think you can reform them. They can't be, there's no point tweaking things here and there. I really genuinely think that we need some very, very drastic, very serious, centre-right based policies. I'm sorry to say that, and if that does mean going down the line of deportations for those who have committed even petty crimes, in my opinion, they should be deported. I think we need to essentially say, you either respect this country and its laws and the way that we feel that people should live their lives in certain ways anyway. In terms of our the way that we approach our idea of morals, and like I said, that our values on human life and what we feel is acceptable as a way of life, in terms of the law and things like that, and what isn't, and what we deem to be culturally right or not, and what we deem to be appropriate behaviours in our society, then I think that we need to have some kind of a charter or something. We need to have some kind of, a modern day Magna Carta of sorts, something along the, I don't know, some kind of constitution or something that essentially says, this is what it now means to be British. This is what it is to be English, British, or whatever, Scottish, Irish, Welsh, And these are our rules. These are the rules that you will abide by. And these are the consequences if you don't abide by them. And before you even come here, there will be a very long, very strict process where you will be assessed again and again and again, and you will have to pass a number of strict, difficult tests, and you will be assessed in many, many ways. You will be assessed physically, mentally, emotionally. You will have your background assessed, your criminal record, if you can get, if you know, and you will be assessed, and to see if you are essentially the right kind of person that we want in our country. Because I think if we don't do that at some point, then this issue's not going anywhere. All we're going to do is we're going to be here 25 years from now talking about the same thing for this, this short-term period of outrage, which is what this will be. It's like anything in the media. There's an outrage, and then it'll just go quiet for a while until either the inquiry starts or the inquiry concludes or whatever. And it's even worse than we even thought, which it will be, and it'll be a lot more systemic than we have any clue about at the moment. I suspect councils are up to the necks in this stuff, along with people high up in the police, probably social workers, possibly even doctors, nurses, lawyers, certainly. There'll be all sorts of people who had an inclination, had an idea, or knew something, or saw something, but said nothing, or reported it and nothing got done about it. And I think that we need to have this inquiry. We need to have this independent inquiry where we can get access to all of these victims. We can have prolonged interviews with them and their families, and then we investigate the media, what their role was in this, in potentially covering it up, because I guarantee they're involved in this to some extent. And then we look into the police, we look into the CPS, we look into Keir Starmer's role in that when he was the head of it. Because I guarantee you this goes far deeper than local MPs and people like that. I guarantee, the police forces. I guarantee you this goes right to the very top, in my opinion. Some people in very high places in the government today, they have information and have had it for years that could have stopped this very early on, in my opinion. I absolutely guarantee it. So we do need this inquiry. Now, who's gonna take that on? Can we be sure that there's neutrality, that there's not any bias going on, and that it's going to end up being a transparent, inquiry with no real conflicts of interest, and that it doesn't end up getting wrapped up in corruption itself. I don't know, but certainly I certainly don't trust the government to carry out an inquiry on this. Not at all. Why would you trust them if it's took them this long to bring it to the forefront? And if so many of these the thing is, it's interesting how a lot of this stuff happened in Labour areas. That tells you something, doesn't it? Because a lot of these Labour areas tend to have been run down parts of the UK, where there's a lot of social deprivation, unemployment, where there are certain sectors of those towns and cities that have ethnic minority groups. And like I said before, they tend to be protected. And it seems to me that they seem to have had an elevated status, and that British citizens, certainly over the last few years, have essentially been told that you don't matter anymore. You're not important anymore. You're not even really the natives of this country anymore. You don't have a place really anymore. And if you don't like it, leave. That's the kind of it's just this whole passive aggressive approach to anyone saying anything about that tried to say anything about this, and has had their life altered or completely ruined by speaking out or trying to speak out about it, and being labelled as bigoted, being labelled as a racist, for saying things that are just even a child, a 2-year-old could tell you about. This is not difficult. It was obvious what was going on here. People knew things were going on. People saw. People are not stupid. People see things, and people talk. People gossip. And I guarantee there's a lot more people out there that knew about this stuff. And members of the public as well. I'm not just saying it's the authorities that are to blame. It's the public as well, because they probably didn't do enough. A lot of busybody types that didn't say shit about it. So they're just as much to blame as well. But for anyone that actually did try to speak out and do something, I have the utmost respect for those people. But unfortunately, they're few and far between. Because most people are cowards, and it's all about self-preservation. Like I talked about in the last video about human nature. Human nature, unfortunately, as depressing as it is to admit, it is unfortunately a part of human nature to be selfish, to look after your own interests more than anybody else's. Even though you know that deep down what you're seeing, what you're hearing, what's happening is wrong. You know it's wrong because you feel that it's wrong, but you don't really care enough to do enough about it. And that's the attitude that you get from a lot of the, you hear just the way that these people talk on the Labour benches. Just everything about them to me just screams, how dare you talk about this issue? How dare you bring this to light, kind of thing. This whole, how dare you reveal this secret that we've known about for decades? And it's been like that for a long time. This power play bullshit. This whole morally superiority complex thing that I think the Labour Party's had for a very long time, and mixed in with classism as well. These middle class types that have done well for themselves or even working class types that have done well for themselves in the Labour Party, that look down their noses at the average working class person. That's what this is really about. It's like when I've talked to people in the council myself, civil or in the civil service or whatever, you always get that impression that they think that they're better than everybody else. They think that they've got this moral authority over everybody else because they're educated, or they've got a certain type of politics that they feel is, like I said, is more morally righteous, is morally superior than everybody else's. It's this egotistical menace, really. It's fucking dangerous. It's really dangerous, and clearly it's led to some I mean, what do you say, horrific I don't know what you can say. I don't know what word really truly does it justice, but I don't like using the word evil because there's too many connotations with that. But it's too overused, that word. It's just too. It's beyond. It's the way this has been dealt with over the years, the way this has been dealt with now, it tells you exactly the sort of people that are running the UK and have been for years. That's what this is. They only care about themselves and their friends, about saving their own necks, about helping their friends in high places, and keeping that salary coming in every month or whatever. You know, that's all this is really about. As far as a lot of them are concerned, you know, what was it, Jess Phillips, whatever her name was, you know, I think, didn't she post something like, oh well, these girls should shut up for the sake of diversity, or whoever it was. I mean, if that should be Labour's slogan. Might as well be, because that's what they think. That's genuinely what they think. I guarantee if you sat down with most of these Labour politicians and they actually had a genuine, real, honest conversation, that's what they would say. Diversity trumps doing the right thing in their minds, in their sick, twisted, depraved, deluded, just vile, messed up, just sickening mentality. That's what the UK is. That is exactly what it is. And you know what? To some extent, that's kind of like why I think so many people have left over the years, because they've seen it for what it is. That they've seen that you can't do anything, you can't change anything, you can't talk about anything without there being yes, you can talk about things, but you can't talk about things without there being any consequences. So people just leave. They just get to such an extent where they just give up on it, and that's what you're seeing. That's why you're seeing so many people leave the UK. People with talent, people with potential, people with money. They don't want to be involved. They don't want to be surrounded by that toxic, hierarchy of bullshit. It is beyond. It's beyond belief. It's truly. And the fact that it's taken the Conservatives 14 years or whatever to table this motion or whatever you want to call it, this a need for an inquiry. That tells you everything you need to know about the Conservatives. They didn't really care either. They didn't want to. Nobody wanted to touch this in the mainstream media, in the mainstream political parties. That is an absolute fact. Okay, you can say, well, a few, maybe a handful of media touched upon it. Yeah, they touched upon it, but they didn't do anything about it. They covered the story, but they didn't do out about it, did they? Maybe they could have. I don't know. Maybe they couldn't have done anything about it, but maybe they should. They could have tried. It's not enough to just expose things. Anyone can say that something bad's going on, but to actually try and do something about it, to try and stop it. Why wasn't that done? I can tell you probably why, because probably some people in the media were probably associated with it in certain ways. I'm guessing anyway, or that they've got connections with people in government, so they were told to keep quiet about it, told to not pursue it anymore. That's exactly what it'll be. That's why this never went anywhere, really. Okay, you had convictions and stuff, but what does it matter? The problem's ongoing. I guarantee it's going on right now, and it will and like I said in the previous year, it'll go on until. I mean, look. The solutions to these problems aren't going to be easy ones. So let's not delude ourselves about that. No one's saying that the solutions to these things are easy or that, I'm not saying there's some quick fix here. I think that in my opinion, I think that the solutions to these issues would be deemed too extreme. People know what needs to be done, but there won't be enough support, politically that is, to push things through that would stop this. That's my approach on it anyway. Tell me I'm wrong. I mean, I might be wrong, but I just get the impression. I don't think it's going to be enough to just. I think the days of endless bureaucracy and consultations or meetings or debates, tabling motions, having inquiries, it just doesn't do anything. It hasn't done anything. How are we still here 30 years later, or 25, 30 years later, right? And a lot of these people are out there working jobs, out on the streets, probably looking for more prey. I mean, what the fuck? What the fuck is going on? Why are we allowing this? What I want to investigate is the judges that are involved in these cases. That's what should be investigated. What the hell is going on in the judiciary system? What the hell's going on in the prisons? That's what needs to be investigated. Keir Starmer is the first person of everybody else he should be top priority. In my opinion, he should be he should be under arrest. He should be under investigation right now. In my opinion, I'm serious. And so should a lot of those MPs that voted to disallow this inquiry to go ahead, or put in place the procedures that would allow it to go ahead. I mean, who sides with someone who doesn't want this whole thing to be investigated? Why are they doing that? They're scared they're going to lose the jobs. Is that what it is? Because I guess it probably is. Tells you a lot, doesn't it? As far as I'm concerned, Keir Starmer is a dead man walking, and he knows it. He deep down he knows he's in real trouble here. He wanted this thing to go away, and now it's blown wide open. At least the first level of it, anyway. Because I guarantee there's a lot more of this. And when the truth comes out, that man will be one of the most. He already is one of the most hated people in Britain. But I can guarantee you, when it all comes out and it reveals that he's up to his neck in this, or he's even drowning in this stuff, and he allowed people to go free, and he set in motion decisions that prevented this stuff from being properly investigated and people being brought to justice, that man's finished. And as far as the Labour Party is concerned, no one's going to vote for them. Not unless you're an ethnic minority or, a left-wing extremist, more or less. Nobody in their right mind would vote for Labour. They've essentially just sealed. They've just handed the next election over to Reform, probably. I don't think they quite understand really what they've just done by trying to prevent this inquiry to go ahead. They really have. They have one foot in the grave. They really do. They're finished. The only, at the moment, and I don't like to say it, but at the moment, Reform is the only real alternative at the moment. And I wish it wasn't the case. I wish it wasn't. Because I don't even know really if Reform is the right approach completely. I don't think Reform's going to go far enough to deal with the stuff. Unless they're holding their cards close to the chest and, they're just not saying everything they want to do yet. And that might be what's going on. Would be a smart move. But I suspect they're just essentially a little bit more to the... I suspect they're a little bit more... They're going to be a little bit more bold than the Conservatives. But that's as far as it'll go, probably. And essentially, these problems won't go away. They might be reduced somewhat, but they won't go away for the foreseeable future. And what will happen, things they'll continue as they have, and I think it'll just continue to get worse over time. And I think eventually people will just give up on politics, I think. If Reform don't change things around like they say they're going to do, if they really don't make some very drastic, potentially controversial policies, then I think you can expect to see... I just think there'll be a complete breakdown in society in that country. It's happening anywhere. The country's far too segregated. It's just too broken. This is partly why there are issues in certain communities, because they are communities. I don't think the British, the actual natives, the genuine British people, English, Scottish, Irish, Welsh, but in this case, let's say English, they don't really have much of a community anymore. I mean, apart from, let's say, a small minority of elderly people that maybe go to some clubs and things like that. But I mean, for the most part, there's no real sense of community engagement or connectedness, togetherness anymore. That went years ago. That probably went in the 70s, 80s. Because there wasn't much of it there in the 90s when I was growing up, 2000. So it's been gone a while. But I think in certain communities, probably more the Muslim-dominated areas, there is probably more of a sense of that, and that's why people aren't coming out, because they're all sticking together, and nobody wants to be the outside of the black sheep kind of thing. Nobody wants to, be known as the one that spoke out against the wrong-uns in their community, because they know what would happen to them. We just made some... We made some god-awful decisions. Well, not we. I mean, politicians in the 50s and 60s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and when Blair got into power, it was just left-wing ideology on steroids, essentially. It was just endless failures, endless incompetence, endless carefree attitude with, well, let's just whatever happens kind of an approach to things. And people are just not giving a fuck, really. They're just not caring, because the consequences won't affect them or their families or their friends, because they're going to live in nice posh areas where they don't have to deal with ethnic minority gangs and crime and things like that, because they can afford to live in nice posh leafy areas where the vast majority of people, certainly the vast majority of working class people, can't afford it and never will be. Even if they've got a decent job, they can't afford to live in some nice posh area, a nice decent part of the country, in the Midlands or the South, because they don't earn enough money, and it's all deliberately set up that way. Because it's all very divided, it's all very segregated. They want exactly the people that they want based on class. That's for the most part anyway. Unless you've got a decent amount of money, or unless you've got a certain accent that they like, or you've got a certain personality they like, whatever. But for the most part, the upper middle classes, they don't generally get along really with the working classes, or they certainly don't like them really. They might tolerate them, but they don't really like them. They look down their noses at them. So you've got all that stuff, and I believe that's played a part in this, in why this has been why there's been so much of a pushback against this whole thing for years, because they don't. It's like, how dare the working classes of all people say, such offensive, such overly sensitive, potentially catastrophic things, even though they're true. And that's what's happened. We've allowed ourselves to be backed into a corner. That's what this is. We've become too afraid, and certainly since this woke thing started to take power, 10 years ago now, probably post Brexit. Around that time, the whole woke thing's been really ramped up. Probably more since the sort of Black Lives Matter movement and all that kind of stuff. I think that we've just gradually been pushed back into a corner where we essentially don't really have any rights anymore, and that we're demonized, where we've been pushed under an umbrella kind of thing. We're seen as troublemakers. We're seen as stirring the pot kind of thing, saying provocative things or saying things that could create community tensions, to rise up, and things that could cause civil unrest to happen. I think essentially what this is really about is, it's not so much about a fear of Muslims rising up and committing terrorism. Well, that certainly, there's no doubt that's a part of it. But I think as well that there's been this genuine fear that the authorities didn't want this information getting into the wrong hands. And what I mean by that is, they didn't want this information getting into the hands of people like the BNP or the so-called fringes, political fringes. Even though the BNP was probably one of the very first political parties to ever raise awareness of this, and tried to do something about it. I don't really think the BNP is a real genuine fascist political party. It's not even really a party anymore. I mean, it hasn't been for years, and it probably never will be. But something will replace the BNP. As I said in my last video, I think, and I suspect that UKIP might be that thing. But it won't go as far, but it will be very serious. And I think that I wouldn't be surprised if potentially at some point UKIP gains more momentum again. There's a resurgence of popularity and support for it if Reform don't do well, or something else comes into the picture. And, I think there could be coalitions that at some stage in the future. I think, eventually, if we don't sort this out at some point in the next, say, 10, 15, 20 years, I think we're going to see... I just think the Britain's going to collapse. It's going to completely collapse. There's going to be so much unrest, so much division, and genuine hatred, and you're going to see real ugly, terrible things. You're going to see some very serious things. You're probably going to see more terrorism. You're going to see genuinely actual far-right groups popping up and fighting with ethnic minorities. I guarantee that's what's going to happen. There's going to be... It's going to be disturbing. It's going to get to a point where the army are called in, I think. I think that's where this is heading, if something isn't done soon. Not only to address the grooming gangs, but just to address just the lawlessness in across the board in the country, really. The fact that if we can't get back the respect and you know, appreciation for the police, for example, then we're lost. We're completely lost as a country. And at that point, nobody will have anything to lose, and people will then say, well, you know, if the authorities don't listen and they don't do anything, and our lives are being made more hellish every year, where we have less and less money, we have no quality of life anymore, we don't take precedent, we are not the priority anymore in this country, we're you know, like we don't, essentially don't exist, we don't matter, then people will start to go on vigilante, you know, missions, essentially. They will start to go on, they will start to form groups, and at that point you won't want to see what happens. It will get very, very nasty, and a lot of people will get hurt, and a lot of things will change after that, and it might not be the change that people want, but, you know, people will have been warned, and people have been warned for years. They've been warned about the potential consequence. You know, I wouldn't be surprised if when all the truth of this comes out, more riots happen again, much worse than before. I'm honestly, I expect the country to erupt at any point. I think, really, honestly, I think it's a time bomb now. I think it really is. I think the sand timer is almost done. You know, I am someone that always wants to obviously maintain peace and civility in any situation in life. But I think when people are pushed to the edge, when people push to the extremes, where people feel like they don't have a voice anymore, where nothing they say matters, nothing they do seems to make any difference, then, you know, obviously people snap at that point. People then start taking matters into their own hands, which obviously nobody wants that to happen, not in any part of the world. But I certainly don't want to see it in Britain. You know, there was no need for this to get to this point. This could have been prevented. I think it could have been prevented completely, because all we needed to do was have a strict vetting and a process, a strict immigration policy, where we essentially put bans or serious limits on the amount of people that can come in from certain parts of the world that have problems with misogyny, extreme violence towards women, backwards ideologies that we as a country don't think should be allowed into our country, and that's it. And anybody that does come in from those countries should have to abide by very strict laws and procedures, regulations, whatever. You know, there should be you should absolutely have to speak the language. That should be the first thing. I think you should be monitored personally for the first year or two that you're in the country, and after that, every 6 months or every year or something, you have to go and be assessed, and to see if you're still compatible with the country or not. Anybody that's in the country illegally or legally from other parts of the world that goes on to commit crimes, in my opinion, they should all have the British citizenship revoked. I think, you know, some people will say, well, that's far right. That's too. They go into try to extreme there. I don't think that would be right. Well, I think at some point we've got to sit down and say, well, look, what are the deterrents then? How do we prevent this from happening again? Or do we just talk? Do we just go to the community leaders and imams and we just keep talking about it? Or, you know, tell your community not to do these things because that's not how we do things in England. You really think that's going to work? You really think you just keep talking about this is going to change anything? Is it fuck? It's not going to change a thing. All right? And the moment, the faster we accept that, the better. What I think needs to happen in the UK is we need to have, well, first of all, we need to get rid of this Labour government. There shouldn't be anywhere near such a position of authority and power in that country. They should never have got into office. The Conservatives were bad enough. They destroyed the economy enough over 14 years, and God knows what what's going to be left of the economy over the next few years of their government. One way or another, Starmer will have to resign at some point. I can guarantee that's the first thing that's going to happen. He will have to resign, and I suspect that'll probably happen after May, at some point, or certainly over the next year or two. He will go on and on and on, but eventually he will be pushed out of that party, or there'll be something that happens, and there'll be an early election. I hope it does. I hope it happens. We can't go on. We can't go on with this kind of this depraved approach to politics, to our society, to our culture. We can't go on like this. We can't. This has got to stop. All of this shit, all of this progressive ideology needs to be thrown out of the window. Look, these are the things that I would do to try and change the UK, to try and get it back to a respectable position. First thing I'd do is I'd completely ban people from certain countries unless you've got some very high skills, you've got a certain amount of money, and you have absolutely no serious background. But also those people would be checked every so often. They'd be monitored, or they'd have to come in for an assessment every so often. That's the first thing I'd do. All right. Anybody found in the country illegally, no matter how long they've been there, they would be kicked out. They would be deported there and then, or within a few days or few weeks. I wouldn't give a shit. If you're willing to come into the country illegally, break the law, work illegally as well, which is what most of them will be doing, working in the black market, some all sorts of seedy, dodgy stuff, you should be deported, and you should never, ever, ever be allowed back into that country again. And if you ever do come back to the country illegally again, then you go to prison for 10 years, 15 years. And you either serve it in the country or you serve it back at home. And the government sends so much money to certain countries every year to fund these people being deported. They've got no place in England, shouldn't be there anywhere. We don't want them. So they go first, they go straight away. And anybody that's there actually legally on a visa or has got citizenship that commits even the most petty of crimes, and I'm not talking about like silly things like spitting or throwing a bit of trash on the floor, but let's just say, I don't know, things like say theft of something, or I don't know, causing being a public nuisance, or shouting at the police, or I don't know, anything like that. Those people should be arrested. They should be sent to jail, and anything above that, in my opinion, they should have the citizenship revoked, and they should be booted out the country, and we pay for them to go on. Whatever the country that they belong to, that government gets so much money every year to allow for these people to return to their countries. We don't want these people in our country. And anybody that's a native in the country that does anything like that, then of course there should be more stricter sentences. There should be more stricter rules for things. I'm sorry, but this is the way that we need our country to go towards. We need to start really giving a shit about where we are and where we're going. Segregation needs to end. We need an actual, genuinely, something set in paper, a legal framework where we say, this is what it means to be British, and this is what you will do as a British citizen, or at least this is what you will not do as a British citizen. And if you don't want to follow those rules, if you don't like the rules, then leave. Pack your bags and fuck off. You don't have a right to be here, all right? It's a privilege to be in this country, just as it's a privilege for me to be here in Thailand. I don't have a right to be here. The Thai government could cancel my visa at any point, and they would have the absolute right to do that. I'm not a Thai citizen. I don't have a right to stay here for the rest of my life, or even for a year or a few months. And I have to respect that, because it's not my country. I don't make the rules. I'm a guest here, and I'm grateful to be a guest here, but I know my place. And that's what should happen in England. I don't care if you've been there for 20, 25 years, 30 years. If you break the fucking law, you face the consequences of that. Because it's our country and we make the rules. I don't give a fuck who you are or how long you've been there. You either respect that culture, respect its laws, respect the way that we do things in that country, or you pack your bags, get a visa, get a plane ticket, and off you fucking trot. And anybody else in that family that doesn't want to abide by those rules and doesn't respect the culture, they can go as well. We need to start being very, very, very strict. Because that way, we send a deterrent. We send a real message that we are not fucking about anymore. We've been too soft for far too long. And that's exactly why this stuff's been gone on for so long. We might not have enabled it completely, but we're just as much just kind of blaming away as well. We didn't want to talk about it. We didn't want to have these uncomfortable, difficult, sensitive discussions about these things. But we've all known for a long time that there's been problems with certain ethnic minorities in that country. We know that Islam wants to have its dominance and to have its own way in that country, which is why they've got Sharia courts, why they've tried to implement their own rules in certain communities. Marches up and down in London every other weekend last year, shouting all sorts of obscene shit. They should all be deported as far as I'm concerned. And anybody that's actually British, they should go to jail for that. If you're calling for violence and hatred against other people, then they should go to jail. I think the days of being soft and being overly tolerant and being overly polite, I think those days need to go. They need to go right now. They should have gone years ago. That's what would have prevented this stuff from happening, by being honest, by being real, and having those conversations early on, before we even allowed anybody into the country. Not enough research was done, and the wrong people in the wrong positions allowed this stuff to happen by not assessing who these people really were, where they came from, and what their cultures and societies accept. We need to say, this is how our society works, this is how our culture works. These are things that we deem to be moral, and these are the things that we don't. This is the law that applies to everybody. And you either abide by it or not. This is the predominant religion of our country, because that is our heritage, that is our background, that is what form the fundamental basics of this country. And if you don't like that for whatever reasons, and you don't want to respect it, or you want to change it to how you see fit, then as far as I'm concerned, you don't have a right to be in that country. Imagine if I was doing that here. If I was just saying, I don't think Thailand should be a Buddhist country. It should be a Christian country, because that's what I think is the better way to do things. I'm sorry, what? I'm sorry, who are you? How dare you come here and try to change things? Who the hell do you think you are? That's how I see those kind of people. The people that want to dominate the country, the culture, the society, the law even. You need to go. You need to go. We need to have serious deterrence. The borders should be patrolled by the army or the army and the air force, whatever, and obviously the navy. Airports need to be stricter. Mosques should be regulated. They need to be investigated every few weeks, every few months. And anybody working in certain communities, I'm sorry, I know this might sound horrible, but this should be investigated. This should be investigated. If clearly there are certain communities in England that have consistently caused issues in that country, then they need to be investigated. They need to be properly looked at. And we need to, at some point, sit down, either after an inquiry, a series of inquiries, whatever it is, And we need to say, well, can we continue on with this particular aspect of our society being a part of it or not? Should we allow Islam to continue to be a part of our society? And that I get it. People will say, well, that's almost far right. That's a very, that is a very dangerous topic to talk. Well, it shouldn't be a dangerous topic to talk about, and that's another thing we need to do. We need to get rid of all this woke bullshit, and we need to say the law is there. You are allowed to have free speech, regardless of if it offends people or not. You don't have a right to be offended, as far as I'm concerned. You could be offended all you want. So what? So as far as I'm concerned, a lot of things need to happen to change the UK into a better place. And if certain things don't happen, if you don't start getting very, very selective about the people that we allow into our country, the problem will continue to get worse. The very first thing that needs to happen, that should happen today, is that the people coming in on these dinghies across the channel, that needs to stop. I mean, what is it? Every week, a few thousand people are coming into the country illegally, and how do you think that's going to play out? What do you think the outcome? Do you think there's going to be some great outcome of that? Do you, Mr. Starmer, the Home Office, the Border Force, RNLI, the French authorities? Do you think that's going to end well? I'll tell you what's going to happen. There's going to be more terrorist attacks, there's going to be more grooming gangs, and there's going to be an even bigger black market, underground market. A lot of these people will go undiscovered probably for years, and I wouldn't be surprised if they form cells, terrorist cells. That's what I think is going to happen now over the next few years. It's pretty much guaranteed. So yet again, the British public will suffer the consequences of it. More people will die just so that Keir Starmer can sleep better at night. This guy is an evil, dangerous, horrible, nasty, vile individual. He should be in prison. He should be forced to resign, and there should be a snap general election. Just based simply upon what's going on right now. If over 300 people deny a right to have an inquiry about one of the biggest, most despicable, disgusting, horrendous things that's happened in our country over the last few decades in living memory, what hope is there? What hope is there for the Labour Party? What hope is there for democracy? What hope is there for people believing in politics? People believing in people who are supposed to represent us. That's all I seem to do these days, more and more, is just shake my head. Just get angry at things. The whole direction that the UK or England has gone in the past few years is just... sometimes I just lost for words. I just don't even know I don't even know what adjectives, adverbs, or combinations of those things. I don't even really know what you can say anymore. I mean, where do these people expect all of this to lead to? Do they really think that this is the moral, just, righteous thing to do? Blocking an inquiry? Of course not. They know that this is not right. But they know that such an inquiry would lead to a lot of people losing their jobs and a lot of information, a lot of skeletons coming out of the closet about people such as Keir Starmer and others, probably along the benches, the front benches probably, that would paint them out to be very, very horrible, nasty individuals who would probably end up having to leave the country because they would be so hated. That's what I suspect. Starmer knows he's on borrowed time, and so does the rest of the Labour Party. They know they're not. I wouldn't be surprised if they don't get through this term in government. I hope they don't. I hope the other parties come together and form a table of motion of no confidence in the government. That's what I think needs to happen now. If they're not willing to if they're not willing to do the moral, decent, basic decent thing, then in my opinion, they've proven themselves to be unfit to govern. Along with all the rest of the stuff that they've done over the past 7 months now. Raising national insurance, denying elderly people winter payments, more or less destroying the economy. We're heading towards a recession, apparently. Lying about this black hole, this financial black hole. They're playing tit for tat, point scoring, blaming the Conservatives for everything, even though the country was screwed long before the Conservatives got into power. Blair screwed that country up by he put the final nail in the coffin when he allowed for political correctness to become normalised, along with Gordon Brown. You know, maybe the inquiry would be a waste of time. Maybe it would be. Because a lot of shady people would get involved in it, and all they would do would be withhold information anyway. So you wouldn't get to the root cause. We all know what the root causes of this stuff is. And that's a failed immigration policy. It's progressive ideology that says that diversity, inclusion, multiculturalism trumps the rights of natives, essentially, and that they don't matter and that they shouldn't be allowed to express their concerns, no matter how real and genuine they are. And that the authorities have towed that line, and the media, the mainstream media, have towed that line for, 25, 30 years, maybe even 40 years. So, as far as I'm concerned, the way things are in the UK at the moment, there's no hope for that country. There's none. Absolutely not an inch of hope. Unless we start to take some very drastic measures. And the way and to say that this is our culture, this is what it is. This is actually ours. It's our culture, it's our country, it's our society. This is the religion of the country. And you will respect it. Because if you don't, you're gone. You're gone tomorrow. We need to start being harsh. We need to have people with some balls and integrity to sit down around a table and discuss all of the things that have gone wrong and what we're going to do. Not just to talk about it, but actually to put in place a series of measures that lead to policies that actually change things for the better. Because if things do get better, these things will eventually be reduced and eventually come to an end. And you will eventually track back the right people to the UK and the right immigrants. I'm not saying we don't need immigrants. We probably do. In certain sectors across the country for all sorts of reasons. Partly the population, partly a lack of skills or education, whatever, because of a lack of investment, a lack of money, not enough employment, etc. In certain areas, and just because of lifestyle choice, whatever the case may be. We do need some level of immigration, just like probably most countries do. But I think we have to start saying we need to put a ban on certain places. We need to start putting limitations on visas. We need to sit down and say, this is the new constitution. This is the fabric of our country. You're more than welcome to come here on a visa. You're more than welcome to come and visit the country. You're more than welcome to come live here. However, these are the conditions on which you will be allowed to enter the country, for starters, and these are the conditions in which you will be allowed to stay. And if you break just one of those conditions, or at least more than once, there will be very serious consequences for you. And you will feel the law. You will feel the brunt of our deterrence. You will feel what it means to us to be British. You will feel what it is to be someone who just doesn't deserve to be there. I don't know how else to put it. They will be put out. They will be made to feel very small. That's the direction that we need to go in as a country. And if that means people say that we're extreme, or we're far right, blah, 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 so be it. So be it. If people don't like it, if people that support parties like Labour, that kind of way of thinking, if they don't like it, they're more than welcome to leave. Go and live in China, go and live in Russia or somewhere, I don't know. More than welcome to go and leave. You can go along with all of these other people. Why don't you go to Pakistan or parts of the Middle East or parts of Africa? If you're so pro-immigration, if you're so pro, it's like, why don't you go along with them? Go back with them. Go and live there. These people are hypocrites. They're cowards. These are the most vilest, two-faced, and just nasty individuals that you will ever come across. They hate themselves, they hate the country, and they hate anybody that has a different opinion. I don't hate people with a different opinion to me. I might not like your opinions, but I don't hate them. That's the difference between people like me and the people on the left, for the most part. They want to shut down free speech because it's too offensive or it's too direct. I might not agree with you, I might not like it, I might even have an argument with you, but I don't hate you for having a different opinion. I wish you didn't have that opinion, but you have a right to have that opinion. But I'm not trying to shut people down. I might not want to talk to you, but I'm not going to shut down your right to have your say, to have your view on politics. But I don't agree with you, just like you don't agree with me. I wish we could meet in the middle somewhere. I wish we could compromise. But that's just not going to happen on a lot of issues in the UK. A lot of very taboo, controversial, difficult, let's face it, that's what a lot of these things are going to be. They're going to be very difficult, prolonged discussions, and the solutions are not going to be easy. And there will be a lot of backlash to the things that are proposed by reform. But I don't know what. I just don't know what else we can. I don't know where we go from here. What do we do? Do we just continue on as we are for another 25, 30 years? Wait for this thing to calm down and just sort of brush it under the rug again, even though it's continuing on. Is that what we're gonna do? Is that the country what you want to live in? I think, if anything else, all of these left-wing types, you're right, you have your right to opinion, but I think really you're destroying the country and you've allowed it to be destroyed. You should go and live somewhere where that kind of thing is more tolerated. The average person, the average Brit in the UK today doesn't want any of that woke progressive bullshit. And they haven't wanted it for years. They never did want any of it. So now we have to start getting deadly serious about our identity. What does it mean to be British? What is our culture? What is it to be native Brit? Not this whole bullshit idea of multiculturalism and this not even British but English. What is it to be English? What does it actually mean to be a native English person? And I'm not talking about colour. I mean, what does it mean to be an English person, to be British? If you want to use that term, I don't particularly like that term, but I think it's better to say English, Scottish, Welsh, Irish, because British is this connotation that, well, anybody can be British. I personally think we've got to get rid of that. We've got to do away with that crap, that kind of rhetoric. That's another thing that's led to all this shit. That anybody can be a British person. Well, I don't think you can be, actually. I don't think you should be. I think there should be certain criteria that says this is what makes somebody an English person, a Scottish person, Irish person, Welsh person. Just as there are certain things that make someone Thai or Chinese or Russian or, I don't know, Italian or whatever. I think we need to have some bold ideas, some very bold policies that some people might not like, but are absolutely 100% necessary if we're to turn things around in the future, the near future. And if that means banning immigration from certain countries, so be it. If it means possibly that we have to start putting restrictions on the religion of Islam in our country, so be it. Even if it means we end up having to actually ban the religion altogether because of its problematic nature in the country, maybe that's what has to happen. You know, yes, we do live in a liberal democracy, and you have a right to follow your own religion. But there comes a point where you have to say, well, yes, that's all good and well, but it's obvious there's some serious fucking problems with this religion. We don't seem to have any problems with Buddhism or Sikhs, you know, Hindus, and usually for the most part we don't really have any major problems with Christians. But there seems to be some serious ingrained issues with Islam. And we need to talk about that, and we need to do something about it. And that might have to eventually mean to say, look, we just don't think that I'm sorry, but we just don't think that this is something that we want in our country anymore. It's proving itself to be too problematic. If you want to be a Muslim, fine. You can go elsewhere and be one. Or you can practice being one at home. But you're not going to practice in public. And we're not going to be having any more mosques. Because this is a Christian-based country, for the most part. And you can say, well, why is it okay for everybody else? Well, because they've proven themselves to be any problem, to not cause any problems. If you're going to start causing, well, you can say, well, but what about the vast majority? Well, the vast majority of Muslims don't ever speak out, never do anything, never protest, never show any outrage, never show any anger. So I don't think they have a right either. Because they don't seem to care about those. They didn't seem to care about those girls that have been raped for 25, 30 years. They don't seem to care any time there's a terrorist attack. Or these extreme preachers spouting nonsense in public squares and whatever, or in their mosques. No one seems to say anything. No one ever seems to come out and say anything. So in my opinion, they're just as much to blame, and they don't have a right either. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm sorry, but you've had your chance to speak out. You've had over a few decades to sort things out within your communities. You've had quite a long enough. Thank you very much. This is our fucking country, and if you don't like the way it is here, then go back to wherever you fucking originally come from. You go back to your heritage. Go back to your roots. You want to be a Muslim? Fine. You want to follow Islam? You want to follow a certain sect of Islam? Fine. You go back to that country or somewhere where that's more acceptable, and nobody bats an eyelid about it. But don't come back here when you're treated like garbage for being a woman or for being a child. Don't come back into this country, because you won't be welcome. And you certainly won't be following Islam. You certainly won't be allowed to do that in our country. Why should we allow it? Why should we? You had plenty of opportunities to change things within your own communities, and you didn't say a fucking word. You didn't say nothing. You didn't do a thing. How dare you? How dare you? So as far as I'm concerned, and I'm sorry to say it, but that might be something that we eventually have to have a discussion about, and we may have to eventually say, look, we're not having burqas. You're not allowed to wear them in public. If you don't like it, fine. We wear them. At the very least, we'll say we're not having burqas. You're not praying in public. You're not having your loud speakers blasting out all times of the day. We're not building any more mosques. At the very, very least. At the very least. And beyond that, we say the mosques are closing down, they're getting demolished, we don't want them in our country. The religion, the history of this religion in our country has had too many problems, we don't want it here. And that is our goddamn right. That is our goddamn right. We don't have to accept anybody. We don't have to accept any religion beyond our own in our own country, because it's our country. If I go to Iran or Iraq or Afghanistan or anywhere else where there's a major dominant religion, I start trying to dictate the rules and say, well, I think this religion should have dominance over the I'd be in jail. I'd be given a bloody death sentence. So don't come to our country and start trying to make the rules, because you haven't got a right to do that. You should be bloody thankful you've got into the country at all, because you didn't deserve it. You don't have any major skills that we want. You just got in because it was an open door policy. And you got in at the right time, that's all, or the wrong time, whatever we want to look at it. In my opinion, and look, I'm just going to come out and say it, and I know this is going to be offensive to some people, but I think these are the things that we have to do. Eventually, whether it takes 30, 40, 50 years, I don't know. But I think eventually we will reach a point in that country where we will have to say, look, this religion, these communities are causing endless problems and have done for a very, very long time. And because of that, we don't want that in our country anymore. If you want to stay here, fine. But you're not going to be doing this, and this anymore. That's it. What you do in your own personal home, that's up to you. But in public, you won't be doing that anymore. And if you don't like that, then it's time for you to go. And it's time for the rest of your family to go as well, if they happen to support the same things that you do. And any certain types of behaviour that are against the law, or you treat the country with disrespect, you disrespect the culture, you disrespect our buildings, our heritage, our norms, the way that we behave, you don't follow, you try to segregate yourselves, you'll be gone. And you won't be allowed back into the country. There are a lot of things that have to happen in that country that for a lot of people might be extreme, might be harsh, might be too strict. But do you know what? I think eventually in the end, a lot of people will have those same opinions, and then will come around to that way of thinking anyway. Because it's just going to get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse until we reach a point where civil unrest becomes an inevitable outcome, in my opinion. I really genuinely think that is what's coming to the UK over the next few years. Because nothing's getting done, nothing's changing, nothing's getting better. Politicians don't want to deal with these things. They don't even want to talk about them. So if we can't even talk about them, then we can't find any solutions to these things, can we? I don't want things to get to a point where fringe, horrible, nasty individuals start taking over and doing some horrific things. Of course not. I don't want that. I never want that. But that's what's going to happen eventually. I just wish people would fucking wake the fuck up and realise and smell the coffee and see the light that that's what's coming. That's what's there. It's right there in front of people's eyes. That's what's happening. People are already preparing for it, mentally. People know what's going to happen eventually if we don't sort this shit out. I don't want to see innocent people within Pakistan is getting targeted when they haven't been involved with this stuff. Of course not. I don't want to see anybody of any community targeted. And I certainly don't want to see native people targeted either, which is probably what's going to happen eventually. But I'm telling you now, there's going to be an absolute breakdown of trust in that country. There's going to be absolute chaos. And it will result in civil unrest, prolonged civil unrest. But people don't want to listen. People don't want to act. No, just keep bearing my head. Just keep, no, everything's fine, everything's okay. Yeah, I'm all right, Jack, kind of attitude. I won't be here when all that stuff kicks off. Oh, really? Well, I can assure you it's arriving a lot quicker than you wanted to. I don't have all the answers, but I have some suggestions. And that is either to have some really start having some serious regulations on certain communities, the way immigration is works, the way integration, if you can even call it that, works. Immigration policy needs to be absolutely dramatically changed. The criteria that allows you to come in and stay in the country needs to be very, very strict. And anybody working illegally or doing seedy, dodgy things, or anybody involved in any kind of major or serious crimes should be booted out of the country. And if that means a million people go, so fucking be it. Like we haven't got enough people in the country as is. Like the infrastructure isn't already bloody best than it seems. Like the economy isn't already in enough mess as it is. We've got enough issues of our own. We have already had before we'd allowed immigration to come into our country for decades now. It's a small little island. Have a look on the map. It's a tiny little place. Have you seen the size of Africa? Have you seen the size of South America? Have you seen the size of Asia? We can't accommodate the rest of the developing or third world. We can't do it. Because eventually everything will break down and everybody will be at each other's throats. And you'll start to see little sections, little things dividing, and everybody will be at each other's throats. Because there won't be enough money, there won't be enough resources, infrastructure will crumble, and the economy will snap, which is heading towards that anyway. I'm not saying that all immigrants are a problem. I'm not saying that. A lot of immigrants come to the country and do excellent, great, good things for the country. Absolutely, right? Like people that move to other parts of the country. A lot of people try to be decent people, try to add something to the country, to the economy, and generally, most of the time, respect that culture and their society. And that's great. That's a good thing. That's wonderful. But at the same time, there comes a point where you have to start examining where you are as a country, and you have to start asking some very deep, philosophical, existential questions about what does your country mean? What does it actually value? What does it want? What's the future for this place? What do we not want more than anything else? What do we need to prevent? What do we need to stop? And how do we do those things? How do we actually achieve those things? Is it just enough to talk about them? No. Is it enough to just go a few steps, take a few little small steps, and if we just talk about things more with certain people, certain parts of the country, if we do if we just make certain little adjustments here and there, or we try to take a bit more of a diplomatic approach, that's not gonna solve shit. The solutions to the problems in the UK are gonna be harsh. They're going to be harsh. They're going to be very strict. And I don't want to keep banging on about it, but the reality is that the things that have happened, all we ever seem to do in that country is talk about things. That's all we ever seem to do. Nothing ever seems to change. And yeah, it's great to have discussions on places like GB News and Talk TV and so forth. And I agree that things do need to be talked about, of course, because that's the first point of call for anything. You've got to discuss things, but you've also got to be allowed to discuss things. And the left have tried to stop all that. They deliberately tried to censor people and control the language and sterilise things and make things overly sensitive and make people question what they're saying. Make people fearful for things that they tweet on X, or things they post on Facebook, or make videos on YouTube or whatever. Or, people should be extra careful what they're saying in public, and so, that kind of. And they've created this kind of fear in society for decades now. Political correctness needs to go in the fucking dustbin. That has to go. I'm not saying you have to be a mean, horrible, offensive, person all the time, but you should be allowed to speak. You should be allowed to speak your mind. You should be allowed to say things that you actually think, and there shouldn't be any consequences for that. Now, of course, if you're inciting violence towards people, then that shouldn't be tolerated. But up to a certain point, you should be allowed to speak your mind. And if that offends people, so fucking be it. Because you know what? Maybe that's what we need now. Maybe that's where we need to go. Maybe we need to start offending people. Maybe we need to start saying the real horrible shit that people have been trying to prevent saying for decades. Maybe that's where we need to go. Maybe that's how we get out of this mess. We have the right to say what we want. And secondly, we have the right to do what we feel is necessary for our own safety and security of this country, for the safety and security of young girls, of young lads, of vulnerable people, and the British people, the natives of that land, who have a right to be there, whose parents and grandparents and great-grandparents go back, who belong in that country, and have a goddamn right, as far as I'm concerned, to be there. Anybody else, as far as I'm concerned, is a guest. You don't have a right to be there. You're privileged. You're privileged to be there, and you should be goddamn grateful to be there. And any bit of disrespect should be absolutely not tolerated. If you don't like that country, then fuck off and leave and go elsewhere. Who the fuck do these people think they are, coming into the country trying to change the law? Talking about issues of thousands of miles away. Fuck off there then, go there if you're so fucking concerned about it. Why are you talking about it here? We can't do much about it. Go over there and sort it out yourself. You will be, and people, we believe that Islam is the right. Well, we don't think that. The majority of British people don't think that. They don't want it. They never wanted that religion in the country. They don't want it. But they're so scared to say anything that most people don't say anything about it. But deep down, they don't want you. They don't like you. They don't want your religion, okay? They might not hate you, but they certainly don't particularly like you, and they don't want you in the country. And if they're there, they'd boot you out right now. But British people are far too passive-aggressive, too apathetic, too polite, too tolerant, that they don't realise that it's their own doom. They're creating their own bloody funeral. It's goddamn true what Enoch Powell said about creating their own funeral pyres. Absolutely 100% accurate. That's what we're heading towards, unless we start taking some very, 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 very serious, drastic measures that a lot of people might not like. And if they don't like it, they're welcome to leave. Because I guarantee you at some point, a lot of people will be forced to leave. And it's about goddamn time it happens. None of this shit that's gone on, this groom stuff, should ever have happened in that country. Inquiry should have happened years ago. To anyone that's out there that knew something about it, saw something, and knew about it for weeks or months or even years or decades even, you people don't deserve to be in that country. You don't deserve to be there. As far as I'm concerned. How are you gonna prioritize your own selfishness over vulnerable girls? What kind of a person are you? I don't give a fuck if you had kids. In fact, if you had kids, then that doesn't even make any sense. That should be even more of a motivator to do something. Surely. Who the fuck are these people? Do these people have any essence of morals, any essence of what it means to try and be an ethical individual, to do things that are right, that are moral, to do things that are legal, that should be deemed to be the right thing to do, to have a fucking conscience somewhere within you? Or do you want to give a fuck about saving your own ass, keep that money coming in, securing your job, helping your friends out? Is that the country we live in? Is that the country we've been living in for decades? Because that's certainly what it seems like to me. Where's the conscience? Where is it? Where's the outrage from these so-called moderate Muslims or other people? Where is it? The silence is deafening. It's deafening. What the fuck is going on? If this isn't dealt with properly in the coming years, then you really genuinely will see an actual far-right group, or potentially even a government, come into power that will deal with this in ways that a lot of people will fear, a lot of people will suffer from, and a lot of people won't like, because we will end up in a state, highly controlled state, more or less martial law. That is an absolute inevitability, because that's where this is going. Is that what you want to? Is that the country you want to live in a few short decades from now? Is that what you want your children, your grandchildren to grow up in? Fucking makes me sick. I'm sorry for swearing, but I just don't know how else to express the way I feel about these kind of things. I used to have a bit of respect for the UK. I used to even like the country to some extent. But you know what? The more I learn about it, the older I get, the more I see of it, the more I accept the way that it actually really is, the more that I get why people fuck off to places like Canada and Australia. It's just a cauldron of it's just depravity, corruption, and it goes right from the very bottom to the very top. Of course, there are certainly a number of decent people who have tried to do good things. But you know what? There's just not enough of them. There's not enough of them. Maybe you get the country you deserve in the end. Maybe you get what you deserve in life. Maybe you do. But you know what? Those girls didn't deserve what happened to them. They didn't deserve what happened to them. They were looking for people to speak up and do something. But instead, a bunch of fucking cowards didn't say nothing, didn't do nothing, and now they have to live their lives in a state of trauma because of a bunch of self-centered, cowardly bastards. And as far as I'm concerned, they should all be fucking stripped of their British. Shouldn't even consider themselves to be British, because as far as I'm concerned, you're nothing. You're nobody. You're nothing. You don't deserve to have the fucking to belong. You don't deserve to be in that country anymore. If you supported this, you should be booted out. You're not British. You're not English. You're nobody, you're nothing, you're scum. You're no better than the people that did these crimes. You should all be fucking ashamed of yourselves, a lot of you.